Hi, everyone. This is Victoria English, top coach with Project 90. Thanks for joining me today. I have a special guest. Clark Webb is with us today. I know you're going to love his story and his message. Clark is a sober dad, a recovered alcoholic. He's a writer and a content creator focusing on addiction, recovery, grief, and loss, and personal growth in general. I found Clark when I was reading through my daily Medium articles. If you don't subscribe to Medium, it's a great resource for all different sorts of interests. And of course, I follow sober writers. I came across his article, which is titled, "Why You Don't Need Alcohol, 3 Reasons to Get and Stay Sober." So today we're going to talk about those 3 reasons, which Clark listed as: you are stronger than you think, you have a chance to change history, and your life depends on it. I needed this article back when I was drinking. And if you are still drinking, take a listen, because Clark has a lot of wisdom to share from his journey. Hi, Clark. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for that. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
There was a message there's so many great lines in this article, but one that really grabbed me says, "There is an inner sober strength waiting for you on the other side of alcohol, and you deserve to embrace it." So for our listeners, I encourage you to just sit with that for just a moment. When we are drinking, we forget about our inner strength, but it is within all of us. Clark has it, I have it, and you have it. So let's talk about that inner strength, Clark. You are stronger than you think. How did that show up for you in your journey from active drinking to recovery?
Well, for me, I just had to come to accept that it was okay to be weak and feel weak in the face of alcohol. For me, my big indicator that I had a problem, I guess, was that I just couldn't stop once I started. And once I heard that story a lot, regardless of where I heard it, whether it was through other podcasts or meetings or support groups, that recurring theme with everyone kind of made me finally be able to kind of get away from the guilt and shame associated with that kind of closeted drinker, or, whatever it may be, where you can't stop and you don't think anyone's going to ever relate or understand. And so it kind of feeds the cycle. So, that was like that kind of recovery step 1 for me. And, after that, it was just showing up every single day and surviving things that would have broken me in the past, even as I got sober, going through some really, really hard things in my first year of sobriety that I still stayed sober. Whereas like a bad day at work would have sent me to a bottle like years ago,
Yes.
So first is just knowing that, you're not weak, even if you tell yourself you are, or you hear it from others because they think, for whatever reason, telling you that's going to help, motivate you to do something to change.
Yeah.
God knows they're trying to come from a good place. Like we are not weak because we can't stop, and it's so multi-layered because it leads into that second one about changing history and overcoming family trauma and genetics and stuff like that. But yeah, for me, it was just ultimately, my son came into my life when my mom passed away, and a few years after he was born, I finally got sober and I realized I needed to be more for him. And the first step was just realizing that if I can survive what I do to myself on a daily basis with alcohol to survive, I can only imagine and get excited about who I can become after it, which is, I guess, maybe what kind of spurned that.
Absolutely.
That statement in the writing. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. Clark and I had a nice chat the other day and discovered that our drinking, or the origin of our problem drinking, were similar in that we were coping with a loss, grief. Both of us lost our mothers, and that was a catalyst for increasing our alcohol consumption. And so if you're hearing this and you can trace back when drinking went, whether it went from good to bad or bad to worse, just know that drinking over a loss is very common.
Mm.
And alcohol misuse can happen to anybody. All you need is a body and a brain, which Clark and I also have in common. We each have a body and a brain.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do. And the brain learns that, hey, this is how we feel better. This is our go-to when we feel these very painful emotions. And so it is not a weakness if drinking becomes a habit or a dependence or even an addiction.
Mm.
It is the nature of the beast. This is a highly addictive substance that we are told is a magical elixir.
Yeah.
And the true mark of character, the true mark of strength, well, it's embodied in Clark because he was able to look at that and say, you know what? This has happened, and I'm going to show my character by addressing it, by facing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's also really important for, I guess, whoever's listening or how I approach whoever gets to maybe hopefully find something that I write. Like, I like to really tell people that, it's not your fault. There's a fine line between, we have to take responsibility for who we are. Like today, we have to take responsibility for our actions and, obviously making amends. However we go around doing that's a really important part of primarily forgiving ourselves, but it goes into the second thing I thought about changing history, because it's not our fault, whether people are on the side of that it's truly a genetic thing, addictive personality or way, or I think it's kind of a spiritual trauma imprintation. Is that even a word? I think I just made that up, but
it's a good one. I'm going with it.
It's imprinted on our DNA, but it's a learned behavior from somewhere, and it was passed on to us somehow. So it's not our fault. I mean, my grief counselor, who's my spiritual guide, because for anyone's listening, I started my sober journey before I even realized I was an alcoholic, because my mom passed and I started dealing with my grief. She said to me one day, she goes, your mom and dad, just because they don't drink doesn't mean they're not alcoholics, because, there was rampant alcoholism in my family on both sides. And so it skipped them, but they had their own addictions.
Yes.
So anyone that's listening, it's not your fault, and that's something I'd really reiterate, because the guilt and shame just keeps us in it for so much longer. If we just understand that it's not our fault and that we do have the power to actually change it, which goes to that first point, which you are much stronger than you actually think, Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Right. I learned that as well, that it wasn't my fault, but it was my responsibility.
Yeah.
And luckily today in 2022, there's such access to raising awareness and looking at options for reframing your relationship with alcohol. And, you are a conduit for that change. Just saying, look, you can get back to who you really are and remember what you're made of. So thank you for that. Talking about being shamed, I resonated with what you said about other people telling us how awful we are. And number one, that never works.
No, it feeds the cycle so badly.
It feeds the cycle. But number two, the voice that is the most damning is our own. And so how did we'll move on to the point number two in a moment, but how did you harness a little bit of self-compassion and self-love to aid you along your journey of becoming alcohol-free?
Oh gosh. It's a
Because
lot
it's hard when we're in the
that's,
bottom of that bottle.
I mean, that's going to go into point two in essence. So, I mean, I grew
Let's
up in
go
a
into
very,
it.
very, I grew up in a very religious home. So I'm from Indiana originally. Nothing against Indiana in any way. It's
Right.
part of my story and I love it. But I grew up in a very religious home. So, guilt and shame are kind of part of my life from a very, very young age.
Mhm.
Our parents, as a parent now, I finally can see that my parents were just doing the best that they could, based on their stories.
Yes.
And I think a big part of me having forgiveness and compassion for myself, because I went through my recovery pretty much alone.
Mm.
My mom was already gone. My sister and my father were very understanding and supportive and loving, but they're far away. But a big part of it was posthumously for my mom, understanding who she was, and understanding why she was who she was, and understanding maybe what her addictions were. And then also understanding my father's story and finally understanding why they were who they were, even without alcohol, because my mom hated alcohol. But I think by getting to know them, I got to know myself and I got to forgive and have compassion for my little Clark, so
Yes.
an exercise that I did, I don't know if I wrote about it. I think I wrote about it, but I never actually released it or anything. I wrote something about meeting my mom and my dad as children, because they're both scared little kids, and it's a common theme you hear in recovery, is that deep down, I'm just a scared little kid. And as a father to a 7-year-old who was a 4-year-old when I started the process, like that resonates with me, because I would never treat my son the way that I treated myself in the past.
Yes.
And so I had this idea of meeting my mom and dad as little kids and just hugging them. And I think that kind of process, I forgave them and I moved on from my resentments around what they did or did not do, and realized it was, again, my responsibility to take some control of where I was at, regardless of how I got there. So
yeah.
And that step one is that self-love, that self-compassion, that forgiveness. So part of it.
Right. One thing we talk about on our coaching calls is when we talk about that inner critic, the inner voice. And I ask members, would you say what you say to yourself to anyone else in this group? And of course they say, well, no, that's horrible. And yet we so easily heap it on ourselves.
Yeah.
And just even if you can just drum up one tiny little seed of self-compassion. And I like what you said about kind of looking at yourself as a child and saying, look, I had unmet needs, but so did my parents. And so did their parents. And how lucky we are to live in this era of where self-discovery is encouraged.
Yeah.
And compassion for ourselves and for others. And I agree that when we stop drinking, in my opinion, it is one of the greatest chances to change history and impact the future, especially as parents.
Absolutely.
And this goes out to those listeners who perhaps have older children. It is never too late. While there is breath, there is hope. And often parents will say, oh, I've made so many mistakes and I've done this and I haven't done that. And I'll say, until now you get to. And, the universe willing, you have many, many years to not just change the trajectory of your life and your children's, but also model resilience to your children, no matter their age.
Yeah.
How do you look at your sobriety as changing your family's legacy, starting with you carrying over to your son?
Yeah. Like for me, I think it's kind of like what point 3 became about, is that kind of like that life that could be lost, literally, of course, like, God forbid we lose our life, and so many have, and it's just so sad, but for me, it was, I started realizing that I was never going to become the person that I believe I was meant to be, or maybe the person my mom believed I was meant to be. And, I constantly saw that, reflected in just my little boy. And I knew that he could be the start of something new if I did the necessary work. And
Mhm.
for me, it's not, obviously he's not he's not a test subject by any means. But
Right.
my goal is that by understanding my fear and my grief and my resentments and the generation before me and how that's all imprinted on me, through
Mhm.
books like the Four Agreements and everything like that, I was like, I'm gonna unimprint this trauma and toxicity on my own DNA,
Yes.
spiritually, emotionally, so that my son has a better chance. God knows he's gonna struggle, but if I can just at least break this streak of
Yes.
addiction, however it manifests,
Mhm.
like at least that's how we impact the future. That's how we change the future,
Mhm.
because the reality is we have so little control in this world. And
Yeah.
if we don't realize that after COVID, I mean, we're still
Isn't
asleep,
that the truth?
but we do have the ability and the strength to change the now, to change the future by changing the now, and we can't change the past, but we can obviously learn from it,
Right. Changing the
so
future by changing the now. I love that.
yeah.
Brilliant. You
Oh.
got some good zingers, Clark.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I
Yeah,
like.
I think about it a lot,
Mhm.
uh, I do what I have to do to take care of my family, but the passion is building because I believe in it.
Yes. Absolutely. Yes.
I believe in it because
Well,
I've seen what it can do for me, and I've seen what it can do for others. And
yeah.
there's just too much life to be lived, you know, and
So much.
everyone deserves a chance to become who they should be. I was listening to David Goggins' book. I don't know if you know David Goggins, but at the very end of it, he just talks about, like, if you believe in a higher power, if you believe in what comes after death, he's like, what I don't want to happen is that I show up at whatever the pearly gates,
Yeah.
and God is like, here's who you were supposed to be, but here's who you were. And
Oof.
when I heard him say that, I was like, man, that impacted me so strongly. And I think I listened to that podcast with a guy named Rich Roll is when I first heard that statement. And that's what got that kind of voice in my head, that positive voice of you're
Mhm.
meant to be more. And it was
Mhm.
that little itch. It was like a new itch. It wasn't a drinking itch anymore. It was like this itch to be better. Uh,
Yes.
and here we are, almost 5 years
And,
later, I
and
guess.
here we
So,
are.
yeah.
Right. And that's, again, for our listeners, when people come into our program, and that's why I think we are so effective over here at Alcohol Free Lifestyle, because traditional, quote, recovery can be, not always, I never like to make blanket statements, but it's a lot about it can be focused on what you are giving up, what mistakes you've made, things like that. Our approach is, look, this is not, you are giving up this one thing in exchange for countless,
Mm,
literally countless benefits.
yeah.
And what you just said, you went from talking about your son to generational trauma to the Four Agreements, which is a fantastic book. We just did a book study on it
The best.
in Beyond 90, and it was mind blowing.
The best investment
Uh,
you'll ever make for $7.
yes,
You
the
know?
Four Agreements.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know what? I read it years ago when I was still drinking, and then I read it again when I wasn't, and it was just
Yeah,
the way I could absorb it this time around.
exactly.
But you said, I'm hopefully changing this imprint of addiction on him. And it is certain that you are having an impact on that, because he now has a role model of a sober father.
Mhm.
But equally important is that you're modeling a growth mindset,
Mm.
being curious about life, being curious about what else is out there. And when you put down that drink, look, there's a void, because we all use alcohol for lots of different purposes.
Yeah,
It's about getting curious about what else is out there. And the world is so damn interesting.
it is. Yeah.
For
In good ways
me,
and bad ways, and you become aware of all of it.
yeah,
And
you do.
yeah,
But we get to put our intentions into the good things.
Exactly.
Alcohol steals so much of our curiosity
Yeah.
about what else is out there because we're stuck in our head. We're stuck in our hangover.
Oh.
We're stuck in our, self-absorbed way of being.
Mm-hmm.
That it really does open up so many different avenues of life. And in that there's countless opportunities to change history and impact the future.
Yeah.
And just live more authentically and fully in the moment, because
There
the
it is.
moments, there's always bad moments in life. We don't get
Yep.
out of here without those.
It's not going to stop.
But don't they seem fewer and far between without the alcohol?
Yeah, they absolutely do. And they're just more tolerable, and yeah, I mean, it all just kind of, I mean, you said it perfectly authentically and in the moment, I'm a big believer of conscious parenting, and that's really what sobriety is. It's just conscious living. It's,
Yes.
being, and it's not easy. I mean, obviously it is a work in progress and it's constant work, and it's almost like a double-edged sword, because we do the work to become aware of it and conscious and being authentic in the moment. And it can make life ultimately just kind of tough sometimes, because we can't control everyone outside of our little sphere of light, if you will,
Right.
and sometimes that's a hard thing, because it's like, the answer, and you just can't help other people see it, but you also have to protect yourself at the same time. So but I mean, I would take this work and that energy kind of input output any day over like just surviving through a hangover another day,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, look, life has work.
Yeah.
Life has work. And so I would rather work at, improving my outlook, practicing boundaries, understanding my place in the world. I'd rather do that sort of work than work at managing my hangover,
Hiding the alcohol.
Yeah. Figuring out how much and when and who knows, and how can I make up for what I said or did yesterday. That is such an exercise in futility.
Yeah.
So this work bears fruit.
Yeah. And then, honestly, that goes back to that first point, I guess, for anyone that's listening, like if any of like what you just said resonates like with them, like think about that on the other side of sobriety. It's like, you and I were chatting offline about the strength that it takes for us to survive, and the resilience that we have to survive in the throes of alcohol and what we need it for. Like that's resilience and strength outside in sobriety. Like it's just, you literally are unstoppable.
Yes.
You can become your own. I for a while I was like, you can become your own superhero. I mean, it's kind of being the parent and the dad. I love superheroes. So
I love superheroes too. That's funny, because in Beyond 90, which is our program that takes you to at least 1 year alcohol free, that's what we call ourselves, the superheroes.
Nice. I love it.
Yeah. The last point we're covering today, you titled it, "Your Life Depends on It." Now, for someone who is just playing around with this sober curious thing, that could seem a little dramatic. Like, oh, come on, Clark. I didn't drink like Clark did. I don't drink like Clark did. So my life doesn't really depend on it. Or, I only drink on weekends. This isn't life or death. I interpreted that as, I'm scrambling for words. See, I'm not a writer like you.
Take your time.
I took that to mean you aren't necessarily talking about physical life or death. The way I explained it recently, I I think a lot of our listeners know that I'm a breast cancer survivor. And, cancer would have killed my body. Thankfully, it didn't, but it would have killed my body before it killed my spirit.
Hmm.
Alcohol, had I kept going, would have likely killed my spirit
Hmm.
before it took my body. And I don't mean dying of cirrhosis, although, look, that can happen. And if you're listening to this and you're in any sort of comparison, just because you don't drink a certain way now doesn't mean you won't in the future. Clark and I didn't just go from being a casual drinker to overnight doing all the things we did. So
Yeah.
it could be that dramatic, but it's more about being fully alive.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, of course, no, there's, like you said, I mean, I think in the article I mentioned that, of course, there is a literal sense, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful and very fortunate to be alive sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, because there are moments where, I mean, just a simple decision could have sent things a different way,
Right.
But for me, for that one, it is about becoming who we're meant to be, because, just like there's a catalyst for change, my mom dying was my catalyst for change. There's also a catalyst for how we use alcohol to go up a notch or two. For me, it was, I know when it woke up for me, because I was casual, having too much partying fun, but then I suffered a big moment of grief. That was also encompassed shame and guilt back when I was 24 and I had no one to talk to about it. And
Yeah.
that is, I recall that is when my relationship with alcohol shifted.
Mm-hmm.
And so for anyone, I just say, when it comes down to your relationship with alcohol that might be holding you back, whether it's physically or mentally or emotionally, like, what value does it offer you? If it doesn't offer you a positive value, why is it in your life? And as you and I were joking offline, I'm a CrossFit coach. And so I see a lot of clients, and I'm, and I hear a lot of stories about how, oh, my back hurts, or, inflammation. And they talk about hitting up the local brewery. And I'm just like, hey, have you thought about taking off 30 or 60 days? See if that helps your lower back. You might be surprised, but it's, yeah, literally, yes, it's important because, unfortunately, alcohol has taken a lot of lives.
Mm-hmm.
But it's more about what makes me sad is, for me, I called it ghosting. I was a ghost of who I was supposed to be when I was drinking.
Yes.
And I didn't want to be a ghost anymore, and I wanted to step fully into myself. And I would rather I knew it would be worse than dying is to live my entire life 50% of who I was meant to be. And maybe 100% is not quite achievable, but if I can get to like 85% or 90% by whenever the time comes, that's what it means to fully own your life and to live.
Right.
So
Living at 50.
your life does depend on it. Who you are meant to be depends on your relationship with alcohol. And in our opinions, giving it up.
Yes, exactly.
Or considering it at least.
Yeah. Well, look at the breadth of what you just said, because if you're listening to this, I know you have done things under the influence of alcohol that were not smart or safe. And lucky us, we're still here. Getting in the car just to run up to the corner store. There's pedestrians, there's other cars, there's all sorts of things. Missing a step. People fall downstairs and severely injure themselves or even break their neck and die. So yes, there's that end of it. And then of course, yes, the health complications. It has a direct link to several cancers, cirrhosis. You'd be surprised. It doesn't take that much to harm your liver. So many different things. And I've talked about that in different episodes. But look at what Clark just said. If you are, we have so many members because our members are all high achievers, and they say, oh, I exercise and I do all that. But I just had a flash of, the pearly gates, and saying, you've reached this level of fitness, but this is what you were supposed to do. It could be anything like that. You were a good parent, but you could have been a great parent.
Yeah.
You were financially successful, but you could have been this financially successful not just for the material possessions, but what you can put into the universe with increased wealth.
Mhm.
So yes, it's not just about living at 50%, 60%, but higher.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
knowing that, you know what, life is going to happen, but I've done my part to eliminate as much of the garbage as possible. And
Yeah.
alcohol, sorry guys, not sorry. It's garbage.
Yeah.
It's
We're not going to beat around the bush right
we're
now.
not beating around the bush. We're not sweet talking about this. It's a huge cause of inflammation and just dis-ease. Whether you are diagnosed with a disease as a result of your drinking, you are suffering with dis-ease.
Oh, I like that. That's so clever.
Thanks. So say,
Yeah,
okay, then I've got.
I like that. I was like, did she just do a play on disease? I go, oh, that's amazing.
I did. You can
Very nice.
use it in an article. So Clark's
Dis-ease.
got 12 zingers in this episode. Vic has one. Awesome. I'll take it.
It's a
Dis-ease.
collective. It's lots of
Yes,
singers between both of us. You
we
have
are
plenty of singers.
collaborators. Yeah. That's another thing, by the way, before we end, I just want to say that when you are alcohol free, whether you go public with your story or not everyone has to do this, but the people that you attract, there's such a sense of collaboration. And we face so much opposition and contradiction with others and things like that. And I just find that when you move into an alcohol-free lifestyle, you can call it sobriety, you can just call it wellness, whatever you want.
Yeah.
But don't you find, Clark, and this us chatting right now is a perfect example of just the collaborative nature that the universe tends to bring into your world.
Good old law of attraction.
Yep.
I think I told you when you and I connected the other day, just to kind of get a feel for what we're going to chat about today. I was telling you that I was meeting with my grief counselor, my spiritual guide. And the one line she said like a month ago was like, let's get back to your passion and your purpose. And she's like, so let's make art is what the phrase we came up with. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to get back to my writing. And well, you happened upon my article and you reached out to me and here we are. And
there you go.
This is honestly, I wish every single day was this. And I look forward to every single day being this, because this is what it's about, and I'm truly honored and grateful when the world brings into my life someone as powerful as yourself, simply by putting out there who we're meant to be or what we believe in.
Yes.
Speaking our truths. I'm just a firm advocate that, putting labels aside, no one has to like put their story out there, but there's so much good that can happen and so much strength and power in just owning our truths and being willing to share our truths. Like you never know when someone's going to need just a little sliver of something that you can offer. And to whoever is listening, you never know how you can change someone's life through one kind gesture or comment, or the fact that they know they're just not alone,
That is so true. So many members come in and they're so nervous about going into social situations when they show up alcohol free and everyone else is drinking. Dollars to donuts, you show up in that situation, by ordering a club soda, you will give someone else the courage to order a club soda.
Yeah.
That's just a tiny example, but we all have the power to, like you said, change our life. And then in the smallest ways, the ripple effect happens. And it really does just make life more beautiful. Life is more beautiful without a hangover, for sure.
Absolutely.
But it really does level up every area of how we walk through the world and the way that we interact and what we have to offer to those around us. Yeah. So thank you, Clark. Thanks for being here. Where can our listeners find you and connect with you?
I guess the best thing to do is my website is theclarkwebb.com. Joining my newsletter or my mailing list is probably the easiest and best way to stay in touch. But I'm also on medium.com @ClarkWebb. And then if you're into TikTok at all, it's the only social media thing I kind of do. I'm at the _ sober _ Webb. So
Say that
that's
one more time so people can write it down.
yeah. So
At
at the _ sober _ Webb.
okay. Oh, I
Yeah.
like that.
Two B's.
2 B's.
Yeah. And if you want, I can send you links or whatever, but that's the
Yes.
only social media I do, kind of just small digital memes just to help give someone a better day. Just a simple message. It's not my face, you know. I just like to put out good messages. But yeah.
Okay, I just wrote that down too. The Sober Web. Maybe you can domain that, and we'll all have to pay to access the Sober Web. Wouldn't that be something?
Oh
Get all
gosh,
of
I don't
us.
know. I
get
like
all
your
of us
I like the
alcohol-free
forward thinking.
people. I'll see you on the cover of Forbes going, hey.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Thank you. You just put a little seed out in the law of attraction. I like it. Thank you.
Exactly. Why not? Well, Clark, thank you for joining me today. Thank you for your message to our listeners. I encourage everyone to look up Clark and read his writings. He's gifted. He clearly writes from the heart. He has a beautiful spirit, and yeah, I just am really
Thank
grateful
you.
I've gotten to meet you.
Yeah,
And
Victoria, thank you
until
so much.
next time, everyone, have a wonderful day.